So firstly, I take your claim that the IDF has the highest standards of IHL for any army in history as outrageous. Having particularly served in the British military myself, I think that is a particularly staggering claim. I would like to ask about international humanitarian law again and aid deliveries. So 91% of people in Gaza are facing food insecurity. 1/3 of hospitals there are completely out of action, with the other 2/3 damaged already by the fighting. 92% of housing units have been destroyed or damaged. And there's now 50 days that no aid deliveries have been accepted into Gaza. And in fact, Israeli ministers have declared they are blocking aid, in particular to exert pressure on Hamas. This is, from my opinion, and almost every aid agency in the world, a clear breach of international humanitarian law. I wonder how you think Israel is justifying this.
First of all, with reference to the highest humanitarian standards applied by the IDF, it's not just from me. I think you've had Colonel Richard Kemp, certainly at other parliamentary committees, testifying, John Spencer, the head of urban armed conflict at West Point in America, and there are certainly the members of the military expert panel that I went into Gaza with, who would give very similar testimony. But we'll have to agree to disagree on that. I approach this as an international lawyer looking specifically at the application of IHL. So far as the aid issue is concerned, the statistics on this, I'm afraid, have been consistently misrepresented. So far, across the operation period of, this is before the ceasefire, there was 1.1% of trucks that came from the international community to aid crossing points that Israel refused to allow into Gaza. That was it, because they were either dual-use items or because the aid organisation in question didn't allow a search to be conducted. Now, those searches... It's about the current blockade, not what... Well, let's be clear, because the reports that you referred to were also erroneous, and in fact many of them predicting famine in Gaza, and that have been used to justify the false accusations of starvation as a weapon of war.
Given how little time we have, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could
this
just
does
answer
require
Alex's
a full
question.
Answer, I'm afraid.
Answer the question that you've been asked, if you don't mind, given that we are already running over time.
Right.
You've been asked specifically about aid not getting in at the moment, and you're talking about another period of time, which is in itself contentious, and we don't have time to get into that argument. What we're asking, the question that you were asked was very precise and carefully put, and I would greatly appreciate it. In the few moments that we have left, if you could answer it.
The question I was asked referenced reports of international bodies which have erroneously predicted famine and starvation in Gaza. And in fact, I link in our submission to your report separately we have done on those aid reports and on the famine review that we've conducted, which I would ask the committee to consider, because the IPC report in particular was called out by the Famine Review Committee as being based on only impartial information and being implausible in its predictions. Now, that is significant to answer your question on what aid organisations have reported. Those allegations, I'm afraid, are false, and you only need to look at the volume of aid that has gone in.
Are the blockade in place at the moment?
I'll come to that in a moment, if I will. There were several parts to your question. One only has to look at the volume of aid that has gone in, which is publicly available on COGAT statistics on their website. And the subsequent analysis of the calorific content of that aid, which in the 7 months that were analysed, January to July last year, found that over 3,000 calories per person per day had gone into Gaza, which is significantly in excess of NHS guidelines. That is the position before going into the ceasefire. As part of the ceasefire, aid was flooded into the Gaza Strip, so that even international humanitarian organisations have agreed that there were many, many months of aid available in the Gaza Strip, so that the subsequent seizure of aid going in as part of an attempt to put pressure on Hamas. Let me be clear. Hamas has been stealing the aid, selling it on the black market, and using those funds to fuel its war machine against Israel. So that is the reason for the aid being turned off, on the basis that the civilian population have sufficient because of the flooding of Gaza with humanitarian aid over the course of the ceasefire. I hope that answers your question.
So your position is, despite the UN's reports that over 90% of people in Gaza face food insecurity last week, it's acceptable to conduct this blockade because there was lots of aid delivered in the past.
So the UN reports, and that's why it's important that I address them, have been consistently found to be wrong. And I ask you to look at the numbers, the data that has gone in, and the analysis of the calorific content. If there are indeed individuals facing food insecurity in Gaza, then there is a very clear reason for that, and that is Hamas's diversion of aid, because the total volume that has been facilitated into the Gaza Strip by Israel is far in excess of what is required by individual Gazans. Hamas has been stealing the aid, but also I mentioned they were shooting civilians. That includes shooting civilians that were seeking to obtain some of that aid that was being brought in by international organisations. That is the true tragedy here, which in some sense brings us full circle, that if the United Kingdom's policy is to continue, I'm afraid, to encourage Hamas, and Anthony Blinken did actually, in a moment of great honesty, reference America's part in encouraging Hamas. Every time there was criticism of Israel, Hamas would walk away from hostage negotiations. That is, I think, a very important message for this committee to internalise, to include in its report, and to feed back to the government in terms of building a better future for both Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for coming in and for fighting back. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming in today.
What a BS committee. What a BS committee this is. Well, you're not giving enough food to the Gazans. Have you seen the Hamas fighters? Have you seen the absolute stomachs on these people? Have you seen anybody in Gaza really starving? I see videos coming out of Gaza of people in the grocery store mocking Israel for giving them food. We're, look at us. We're 100% fine, and you're giving us your food. Like, Israel is the Gazans' people only hope. The Palestinians' only hope is Israel, and the entire world is fighting against Israel. It's almost like a mother trying to take care of somebody else's children, and the government is trying to criticize that mother for not doing it well enough. Like, imagine adopting, because we're not responsible for these Palestinians, but we have taken responsibility for them, and yet the entire international community is like, well, you're not feeding them well enough. You're not giving them enough electricity. Like, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. You want to help the Gazans? Go and help them. Like, we have no problem with you going and dropping aid, whether it be from the sky or whether it be from getting Gazans out. Why don't you take in some Gazans? Why don't you take in the 2 million Palestinians that we took into Israel? Israel took in 2 million Arabs, 2 million so-called Palestinians, as the UN Relief Works Agency calls them Palestinians for some reason, because they'll never be regular citizens until they're returned, until the right of return in Israel is destroyed. This is insanity, especially like the end, like the laugh. It reminded me of Umbridge in Harry Potter. For more, subscribe to the channel. If you want to help us make more of these videos, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/JewishUncensored. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.